In a story that defies imagination and ventures into the unknown, Al Pacino, the legendary actor and cultural icon, has returned with a spine-chilling revelation. After a near-death experience, he claims to have glimpsed the afterlife, and his message is nothing short of terrifying. Pacino's tale isn't just a story of personal transformation, it's a warning to humanity. What lies beyond the veil of life? Join us as we delve into his incredible journey and unpack the unsettling truths he brought back from the other side. It was a day like any other in the bustling life of Al Pacino. The acclaimed actor, known for his commanding presence and unforgettable performances, had been enjoying a quieter pace in recent years. That day, he was attending a private gathering at a friend's estate in Beverly Hills. It was an event filled with laughter, familiar faces, and an air of sophistication. However, no one could have foreseen the shocking turn of events that would leave the iconic actor on the brink of eternity. Accounts from those present at the event paint a vivid picture. Pacino had been in great spirits, exchanging anecdotes and effortlessly holding the room in his magnetic sway. But suddenly, without warning, he clutched his chest and stumbled backward, collapsing onto the ground. A hush fell over the crowd as guests rushed to his side, their cheerful banter replaced by panicked whispers and desperate cries for help. The host immediately dialed 911, while others began administering CPR under the guidance of a guest who happened to be a doctor. By the time paramedics arrived, Pacino's condition was dire. His pulse had faded to an alarming irregularity, and his breathing was shallow. The emergency medical team acted with precision, employing a defibrillator and other life-saving techniques as they worked to stabilize him. But just as they were preparing to transport him to the hospital, his heart stopped completely. The words, "time of death," echoed in the stillness as the paramedics documented the moment. For those around, it was a surreal and heartbreaking reality. A legend, a man whose career spanned decades and whose charisma had captivated millions, had seemingly met his end. Friends and colleagues wept openly, unable to process what had just occurred. Some turned to prayer, while others simply stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. Yet, for Pacino, the story did not end there. In those critical moments when his body lay motionless, he later revealed his consciousness experienced something extraordinary. He would recount these moments with astonishing clarity. But at the time, no one could have anticipated what was happening on a level far beyond human comprehension. The ambulance ride to the hospital was somber, with paramedics performing chest compressions and using advanced life support measures in a last-ditch effort to revive him. As they pulled into the emergency room entrance, a faint flicker of life returned, an erratic heartbeat that grew steadier with every passing second. Medical staff whisked him into the trauma bay, their faces a blend of determination and disbelief. The news of his collapse spread rapidly, sending shockwaves through the entertainment industry and beyond. Fans around the world flooded social media with messages of concern, tributes, and prayers. Reporters camped outside the hospital, speculating on his condition, while insiders leaked conflicting reports. For hours, the world held its collective breath, waiting for updates on the fate of the Hollywood icon. Inside the hospital, Pacino's body began to stabilize, but he remained unresponsive. Doctors worked tirelessly, running tests and monitoring his vitals as his loved ones gathered anxiously in the waiting area. For them, the immediate concern was whether he would survive the night. But when he finally opened his eyes and began to speak, what he said left everyone in the room stunned. Pacino's first words weren't about the pain he had endured or the medical ordeal he'd faced. Instead, he began describing an experience so surreal, so otherworldly, that those present could hardly believe their ears. His voice, though weak, carried a sense of urgency and gravity. It was clear that whatever he had seen or felt during those harrowing moments had profoundly shaken him. This was only the beginning of a story that would take those around him, and ultimately the world, on a journey into the unknown. As Al Pacino recounted his experience, the room fell silent. Every eye was on him, and every ear strained to catch his words. His voice, though quiet and measured, carried a weight that commanded attention. What he described defied the limits of human understanding. A journey into a realm beyond life itself. The first thing he remembered, Pacino said, was an overwhelming sense of stillness, not the absence of sound, but a profound quiet that seemed to envelop him completely. He couldn't feel his body, no pain, no movement, no sensation of being tethered to the world he had always known. It was as though he had been untethered from his physical form, floating freely in a space he could neither see nor touch. For a fleeting moment, he felt an indescribable peace, a release from the burdens and complexities of life. Then, slowly, a light began to emerge. It wasn't like any light he had ever seen, neither blinding nor dim, but something altogether otherworldly. It radiated warmth and familiarity, pulling him toward it with an irresistible force. He described it as a kaleidoscope of colors that shifted and blended in ways that were impossible to describe, like witnessing the birth of a star or the unfolding of a cosmic symphony. It wasn't just light. It was alive, pulsating with an energy that seemed to resonate with every fiber of his being. As he moved closer to the light, he became aware of a presence, though it wasn't immediately visible. He felt surrounded by an immense and benevolent force, one that seemed to know him intimately. It wasn't judgmental or threatening. Instead, it exuded a profound sense of love and understanding. Yet, at the same time, there was an undercurrent of something else, something heavy, as though it carried the weight of a truth too immense to fully grasp. Pacino described how the boundaries of time and space dissolved in this place. He could perceive events from his life, not as memories, but as living, breathing moments happening all at once. He saw his childhood, his early struggles, and the triumphs and failures that had shaped him. But these weren't simple flashbacks. They were immersive, almost interactive. He could feel the emotions of his younger self, the excitement, the fear, the heartbreak. It was as though he were reliving his life from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Yet it wasn't overwhelming. It was as if this mysterious realm had expanded his consciousness, allowing him to understand his own existence in ways he never thought possible. But the peace and wonder of this experience was soon interrupted by something darker. Beyond the light, he began to sense a void, an infinite expanse of emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It was cold and lifeless, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of the light. Though he couldn't see it, he felt its presence keenly, a silent observer lurking just out of view. It was as though the void were watching him, waiting for something, though he couldn't say what. And then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the hum of the light. But as he listened, they grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words, at least not in any language he recognized, but he understood them all the same. They carried messages of warning, cautioning him about the choices humanity had made and the path it was treading. The whispers spoke of consequences, of a balance that had been disturbed. Pacino couldn't shake the feeling that these messages weren't just for him. They were for all of us. As he floated in this in-between state, torn between the radiant light and the foreboding void, he became aware of other entities. These weren't human. They were shapes and forms that defied logic and description. Beings made of light and shadow, their movements fluid and purposeful. Some radiated warmth and kindness, while others exuded a sense of unease. Pacino felt as though he were being observed, evaluated by these beings, though he didn't know why. They didn't speak, yet he understood their intentions as clearly as if they had. They were showing him something, guiding him toward a realization he couldn't yet comprehend. The most profound moment, however, came when he felt himself drawn directly into the light. He was engulfed by it, surrounded by its brilliance, and in that instant, he felt a connection to something infinitely greater than himself. It was as though he were part of the very fabric of existence, a single thread in an endless tapestry. Yet, within this connection, he sensed a message, a truth that shook him to his core. The light wasn't just a source of comfort. It was a warning, a reminder of what lay ahead if humanity failed to change its course. Pacino's descriptions were vivid and haunting, leaving those who listened to him both awed and unnerved. He spoke of feeling both insignificant and vital, of realizing the fragility of life and the immense power of choice. He felt he had been shown not just what lies beyond death, but also the consequences of our actions as a species. The light, he said, was not an end, but a beginning, a gateway to a truth that was both beautiful and terrifying. As he recounted these experiences, Pacino's voice trembled with emotion. For him, this wasn't just a story. It was a reality that had forever altered his perception of life, death, and everything in between. It was clear that whatever he had experienced during those moments when his heart had stopped, it had left an indelible mark on his soul. As Al Pacino drifted deeper into the ethereal realm, he became aware of a presence unlike anything he had encountered before. It wasn't something he could see or touch in the conventional sense, but he felt it with every part of his being. This presence was vast and all-encompassing, stretching far beyond the limits of his perception. It was as though he were standing in the shadow of an incomprehensible force, one that radiated both a quiet authority and an overwhelming power. He called it the voice in the light, though he later admitted that neither word truly did justice to what he experienced. The voice wasn't a sound, at least not as we understand sound. It wasn't a booming echo or a whisper. Instead, it was more like a resonance that filled the space around him and vibrated within him. It carried no accent, no inflection, and yet it spoke directly to his soul, bypassing the barriers of language and thought. When the voice first spoke, Pacino felt a sense of awe so profound that it brought him to the brink of tears. This wasn't merely communication, it was communion. The voice seemed to know him, every detail of his life, every secret he had ever kept, every joy, every sorrow, every mistake. It wasn't judgmental, but its knowledge of him was absolute. The voice began by showing Pacino visions. They appeared not as simple images, but as fully immersive experiences. He saw humanity as if from a great height, billions of souls moving through their lives, each one a flickering light in a vast ocean of existence. He saw moments of beauty, acts of kindness, love, and creativity that shone like stars in the darkness. But alongside these, he saw pain, suffering, and destruction. Their shadows spreading like cracks through a fragile shell. The voice didn't speak in sentences or paragraphs. It communicated in bursts of meaning, profound insights that Pacino struggled to articulate even as he described them later. He understood, without explanation, that humanity was at a tipping point. The choices we made, as individuals and as a collective, were steering us toward a future that was both uncertain and perilous. The voice conveyed that humanity had been given great gifts: intelligence, creativity, the capacity for love, but had also been burdened with great responsibilities. These gifts were not limitless, and the balance of the world was delicate. Pacino felt the voice addressing him directly, though he couldn't explain why. It wasn't that he was chosen or special. Rather, he was simply the one who had arrived in this moment, in this place, to receive the message. The voice conveyed a sense of urgency, a warning that time was running out. Humanity was hurtling toward a critical juncture, one from which there might be no return if the wrong path were taken. The voice didn't threaten or condemn, it simply laid out the stakes with an unflinching clarity that Pacino found both terrifying and humbling. In the midst of these revelations, Pacino began to feel the weight of the knowledge he was being given. He described it as an almost physical sensation, as though the truth itself were pressing down on him. The enormity of what he was shown was almost too much to bear, but the voice seemed to steady him, giving him the strength to continue. He realized that he wasn't merely being shown these truths for his own enlightenment. He was being entrusted with them, tasked with bringing them back to the world of the living. The voice spoke of the interconnectedness of all things, how every action, no matter how small, rippled outward into the fabric of existence. Pacino saw these ripples as shimmering waves of light spreading from every human thought and deed, touching others in ways that were often invisible but no less real. He saw how acts of kindness and love created waves that lifted and inspired, while acts of hatred and cruelty sent out waves that darkened and corrupted. The voice made it clear that humanity's collective choices were shaping the very reality in which we lived, creating a future that was either luminous or bleak. At one point, Pacino felt the voice address a question he hadn't even realized he was asking. Why was he being shown this? Why him? And why now? The answer came not in words, but in understanding. He was being shown this because it was needed, because the time had come for humanity to face its truths and make its choices. And though he was just one person, his voice had the power to reach millions, to plant seeds of change in the hearts and minds of those who listened. The voice in the light didn't offer solutions or guarantees. It didn't promise that humanity would rise to the challenge or that the future would be saved. It simply presented the reality of the situation, leaving the responsibility and the possibility squarely in humanity's hands. Pacino described this as the most humbling moment of the entire experience. He felt both the immense fragility of life and the incredible strength that came from hope and unity. As the visions began to fade, Pacino felt the presence of the voice growing quieter, its resonance softening. Yet its message remained etched into him, as clear and indelible as if it had been carved into his soul. He felt himself being pulled away from the light, back toward the realm of the living. The voice's final words, though not spoken, echoed in his mind. You must remember. You must share. You must choose. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the experience ended. Pacino opened his eyes to find himself lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by faces both familiar and unfamiliar. The world had returned, but he knew he would never see it the same way again. The voice in the light had given him a mission, and the weight of that mission was something he carried with him from that moment forward. The transition back to the world of the living was not immediate or smooth for Al Pacino. He described it as being tugged through layers of reality, as though the fabric of the universe itself was folding around him, gently yet insistently pulling him back to his physical body. The warmth of the light began to fade, replaced by a cold and jarring sensation of disconnection. For a fleeting moment, he felt as though he existed in two places at once, one foot in the transcendent realm of the light, and the other tethered to the stark clinical reality of the hospital. When Pacino's eyes first fluttered open, the room around him was awash in fluorescent light, a harsh contrast to the radiant glow he had just left. The sounds of beeping monitors and hurried footsteps filled his ears, a cacophony that was at once familiar and alien. His chest felt heavy, as though a great weight was pressing down on him, and his body was riddled with the aches and pains of resuscitation efforts. But what struck him most in that moment was not the physical discomfort. It was the overwhelming clarity of what he had just experienced. The memories of the other realm remained vivid, seared into his consciousness as though they had been burned there by the light itself. The first people he saw were doctors and nurses hovering over him, their faces a mixture of relief and astonishment. To them, he was a miracle. After being clinically dead for several minutes, his heart had inexplicably restarted, pulling him back from the brink of death. They bombarded him with questions, checking his vitals, shining lights into his eyes, and marveling at the fact that he was not only alive, but alert. Pacino, however, had little to say at first. His mind was still grappling with the enormity of what he had seen and felt. Words seemed inadequate, almost trivial, in the face of such profound truths. It wasn't long before his loved ones were allowed into the room. Close friends and family members, many of whom had been waiting anxiously for hours, rushed to his bedside. Tears streamed down their faces as they embraced him, their relief palpable. But as they celebrated his return, they couldn't help but notice the change in him. There was a faraway look in his eyes, a depth and intensity that hadn't been there before. It was as though he'd seen something beyond their comprehension, something that had fundamentally altered him. Pacino remained silent for a long while, his mind racing with the implications of what he had experienced. He later described this moment as one of profound isolation, not because he didn't appreciate the love and concern of those around him, but because he felt an immense responsibility to process and understand the message he had been given before sharing it. He wasn't sure how to put into words the enormity of what he had seen, nor was he certain that anyone would believe him. The experience had been so extraordinary, so far removed from anything in the realm of human understanding, that even he struggled to make sense of it. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. The first words out of his mouth, according to those present, were, "I've been somewhere else." His loved ones exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what he meant. They assumed he was referring to the near-death experience, but Pacino shook his head. "No," he said, more firmly this time. "It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I've seen something real." Over the next few days, as he recovered, Pacino began to share fragments of his experience. He spoke of the light, the presence of the voice, and the haunting visions he had been shown. His words were measured almost reluctant, as though he feared they might lose their meaning in translation. Those who listened were captivated, though many struggled to fully grasp the depth of what he was describing. Some dismissed it as the ramblings of a man who had been through a traumatic ordeal, but others saw the sincerity in his eyes and knew that he was speaking the truth as he had experienced it. Pacino found himself inundated with questions. What had the light shown him? What had the voice said? What did it mean for humanity? He answered as best as he could, but he often found himself at a loss. The truths he had encountered were so vast, so all-encompassing, that they defied simple explanation. He described it as trying to fit an ocean into a cup. No matter how much he shared, it would never capture the full scope of what he had seen. As the days turned into weeks, Pacino's physical health improved, but the weight of his experience remained heavy on his mind. He began to reflect on his life, scrutinizing his choices and reevaluating his priorities. The light had shown him not only the interconnectedness of all things, but also the impact of his own actions on the world around him. He saw his successes and failures not as isolated events, but as ripples in a vast, interconnected web of existence. This newfound perspective left him both humbled and determined. Pacino's doctors were astonished by the speed of his recovery. By all accounts, he should have suffered more lasting effects from his ordeal, but he seemed to bounce back with a vitality that belied his years. He attributed this not to medicine or luck, but to the lingering influence of the light. "It gave me something," he told one close friend. "A second chance. A purpose." He began to write down everything he could remember about his experience, filling pages with descriptions of the light, the voice, and the warnings he had been given. These writings, he hoped, would serve as a guide for him to articulate his story to others. But even as he wrote, he knew that the message wasn't his alone. It was something he was meant to share with the world, a responsibility that both frightened and inspired him. As word of his near-death experience spread, the media frenzy around him intensified. Reporters hounded him for interviews, eager to turn his extraordinary tale into headlines. But Pacino remained guarded, reluctant to sensationalize something so deeply personal and profound. He understood the gravity of what he had been shown, and he didn't want it to be reduced to tabloid fodder. Instead, he chose to confide in a select few: trusted friends, spiritual advisors, and those he felt would truly listen. Pacino's return to life was not just a physical resurrection, it was a spiritual awakening. He had seen beyond the veil of existence, glimpsed a truth that transcended the boundaries of life and death. And though the journey had left him shaken, it had also given him a sense of clarity and purpose that he had never known before. He knew that the message he carried was not just for him, but for all of humanity. The challenge now was finding the courage to share it in a way that would make people listen. The weight of the message Al Pacino carried began to shape his every waking moment. No longer was he merely a celebrated actor known for his commanding performances and charisma. He had become a messenger, burdened with a truth so vast that it seemed almost impossible to convey. His experience in the afterlife had not just changed him, it had awakened him to a reality that demanded action. The challenge was not just in understanding the message, but in finding a way to make others listen. Pacino spent countless hours reflecting on what the voice had revealed to him. The warning wasn't specific, nor was it tied to any particular event or timeline. Instead, it was a deeply resonant truth about the fragility of the world and the interconnectedness of all life. He had been shown the threads that bound humanity together, threads that were fraying under the weight of division, greed, and neglect. The voice's final words echoed in his mind. You must remember. You must share. You must choose. These three imperatives became his guiding principles. The first step, he realized, was to articulate his experience in a way that people could understand. He began drafting a manuscript, pouring every detail of his journey into its pages. Writing was a painstaking process, not because the memories were unclear. On the contrary, they were etched into his mind with astonishing clarity, but because words felt insufficient to capture the enormity of what he had seen. How could he describe the light, the presence of the voice, or the visions of humanity's interconnected destiny without sounding abstract or fantastical? Still, he persevered, driven by the knowledge that this was not a story for himself alone. It was a message for the world. As he wrote, Pacino also began to share his experience with a select group of confidants, friends, spiritual advisors, and individuals he believed would understand the gravity of what he was saying. Their reactions varied. Some were awestruck, moved to tears by his descriptions of the light and the voice. Others were skeptical, unable to reconcile his account with their own understanding of life and death. But even among the doubters, there was a sense that Pacino believed every word he was saying. His conviction was undeniable, and it lent his story an air of authenticity that few could dismiss outright. Word of his near-death experience began to spread beyond his inner circle, fueled in part by whispers in the media and the curiosity of fans. While Pacino remained tight-lipped in public, the intrigue surrounding his ordeal grew. Speculation ran rampant, with tabloids printing exaggerated accounts of his visit to heaven and talk show hosts debating the nature of his experience. Some labeled him a visionary, others a man who had simply been rattled by a brush with mortality. Pacino ignored the noise. He wasn't interested in fame or validation. He was focused on the message. Eventually, the pressure to speak publicly became unavoidable. Pacino agreed to a carefully arranged interview with a respected journalist known for thoughtful, in-depth reporting. The interview, broadcast to millions, was a turning point. Dressed simply and speaking with an uncharacteristic vulnerability, Pacino recounted his journey with remarkable detail. He described the light, the voice, and the profound sense of interconnectedness he had felt. He spoke of the warnings, the visions of humanity's potential both for greatness and destruction, and the responsibility each individual bore in shaping the future. The interview captivated viewers, sparking widespread discussion and debate. While some dismissed his account as a byproduct of brain activity during clinical death, others found his words deeply moving. Social media lit up with discussions about the afterlife, spirituality, and the meaning of Pacino's message. For many, his story was a wake-up call, a reminder of the fragile beauty of life and the importance of our actions. In the months that followed, Pacino became an unlikely advocate for change. He spoke at universities, community events, and spiritual gatherings, always returning to the themes of unity, compassion, and accountability. His message was not tied to any specific religion or ideology. It was universal, rooted in the simple but profound idea that humanity's survival depended on its ability to care for one another and the planet. Pacino's words resonated with people from all walks of life. He was no longer just an actor. He had become a voice for a movement. Environmental groups, humanitarian organizations, and even world leaders began reaching out to him, inviting him to lend his influence to their causes. He chose his affiliations carefully, focusing on initiatives that aligned with the vision he had seen in the light. Despite his newfound role, Pacino remained grounded. He often emphasized that he was not a prophet or a savior, just a man who had been given a glimpse of something extraordinary. He urged people not to place him on a pedestal, but to look within themselves for the strength and wisdom to make meaningful change. "The message isn't mine," he would say. "It belongs to all of us." Pacino's journey wasn't without challenges. He faced criticism from skeptics and backlash from those who felt he was overstepping his role as an entertainer. Some accused him of exploiting his experience for attention, while others dismissed him as delusional. But Pacino remained undeterred. He understood that his story would not resonate with everyone, and that was okay. His goal was not to convince, but to inspire. In time, Pacino's efforts began to bear fruit. Stories emerged of individuals and communities taking action, inspired by his message. People planted trees, started volunteer initiatives, and reached out to mend broken relationships. Schools incorporated discussions about interconnectedness and compassion into their curricula. And spiritual leaders from various faiths cited Pacino's account as a reminder of humanity's shared destiny. For Pacino, the most gratifying moments came in the quiet interactions. Letters from strangers thanking him for sharing his story, encounters with people who said his words had changed their lives. These moments reminded him why he had been given the message in the first place. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about planting seeds of hope and change in a world that desperately needed both. As he grew older, Pacino continued to carry the message with him, though he spoke less frequently about his experience in the afterlife. He believed he had done his part, that the torch now belonged to others. The message had been shared, the warning delivered. The choice, as the voice had said, was ours to make.